With me now is Vladimir van Wilgenburg, who's a journalist and Kurdish affairs expert who lived for years in Erbil and knows well the issues and the struggle for Kurdish independence. Vladimir, thank you for being with me as we mark 20 years now in power for Bashar al-Assad, and we mark 10 years and counting for technically a civil war in Syria. The world seems to have moved on from the fight for Kurdish independence. Is the dream of the Kurdish people lost? Is it on hold? Or do they still believe in the reality of an independent state in Kurdistan?
Yeah, thank you. Well, in Syria, the Kurdish parties, they don't strive for Kurdish independence, but they're working towards Kurdish autonomy. But as in the past, the Syrian regime doesn't accept any form of Kurdish autonomy in Syria. And also the Turkish-backed Syrian opposition, they don't support any form of autonomy because they says this will lead to separatism and the division of Syria. So the problem for the Kurds in Syria is that both the Syrian opposition and the Syrian regime don't accept their demands.
So then during this ongoing conflict, the civil war that cost hundreds of thousands of lives, who did the Kurds align themselves with? They were caught in the middle. How did they live and navigate the world in Syria?
Well, I mean, the Kurds from the beginning, they were trying not to align with the regime or with the Syrian-backed Islamist opposition. So they're trying to follow a third line. And especially after 2014, they played a very big role in fighting ISIS. And they were allied actually with the United States against ISIS. And from 2014 until now, they are still working with the US. But as you know, that Turkey invaded in October 2019, but also before that in 2018. So they lost territory basically to Turkey, and they're still afraid that there could be possibly a new Turkish invasion in northeast Syria.
Vladimir, I want to ask about the impact on, as you mentioned, the U.S.-Kurdish partnership. The U.S. ultimately betrayed the Kurdish people and a vision to support an independent movement. Here in Israel, there was vocal support for the Kurdish fight for independence, the dream of statehood, but it ultimately was just words. Do the Kurdish people feel betrayed by Israel, by the United States? Do they feel abandoned?
Well, obviously they feel abandoned by the U.S. because the U.S. didn't do anything when Turkey invaded northeast Syria. And also, also in neighboring Iraq with the Iraqi Kurds, the U.S. didn't do anything when Iranian-backed militias invaded Kirkuk after the Kurds held an independence referendum. The whole world was against this independence referendum apart from Israel, actually. So yeah, they do feel betrayed by the U.S., but the U.S. kept repeating that in Syria it was sort of a transactional relationship against ISIS, and that they didn't support national Kurdish autonomy ambitions in northern Syria.
What does the immediate future hold for the Kurdish people? Syria's economy is struggling so mighty right now. The impact of the new Caesars Act, the Sanctions Act from America. How are the Kurdish people living? I mean, your friends and your contacts, how are they getting by day to day?
Well, the situation is a bit difficult because Turkey has been cutting the water. First of all, they have been cutting the water from the Euphrates River to northeastern Syria. And also they have been cutting a water supply from a water station they control. So as a result, there's a lot of electricity cuts, there's a lack of water. And moreover, you have the bad economic situation, which is not only in the Kurdish areas, but in all of Syria. So people have difficulties buying bread and supporting their life, basically. It's very difficult for them economically because the Syrian pound, the Syrian money has there's a huge inflation, and this is also affected by the neighboring crisis in Lebanon with the economic crisis there. So it's really difficult for the people there. But I think also one of the biggest fears still for many Kurds in the region is that Turkey could launch another attack. And in that case, they would be displaced. And then also there would be demographic changes because Turkey has publicly said they want to bring Arabs from other parts of Syria to the areas where Kurds live on the border of Syria.
The new U.S. sanctions and the sanctions that are on Syria now, Are they hurting al-Assad? Are they hurting the Syrian regime? Or is it the Kurds and civilians who are feeling the impact more?
Well, I mean, it's both. I mean, like the Syrian regime has difficulties importing oil and doing business, but at the same time, because the economy is, of course, obviously interlinked, it's like affecting everyone living in Syria. So, I mean, the sanctions don't target civilians; it only targets the Syrian regime. But at the same time, because the economy is so much interlinked, like the whole economy basically is going down the drain. So that's why you see people really struggling because of the inflation. Like people used to have a salary and then suddenly their salary is worth nothing.
Yeah.
So that's why it's very difficult for them, for people to survive now, and poverty is really growing in Syria. And also, I don't think that the Syrian regime will be affected to that extent that the France's say, okay, we're going to make concessions now, or that there's going to be a regime change or something like that. But we have to see how it works. But we saw in neighboring Iraq also with Saddam, there were like years of sanctions on Saddam. But in the end, the only way to get rid of Saddam was by a military operation.
All right, Vladimir, thank you so much for being with us as we zoomed into this story.